Good morning, everyone. My name is Leslie Denard. I'm a career services advisor here at New Horizons. Welcome to today's webinar session. We are featuring recruiting and corporate hiring consultant Gary O'Neill. Today, Gary will be presenting our webinar entitled Acing Your Interview. Before we get started with this session, let me briefly explain some of the ways that you can participate. We are using the GoToWebinar platform for today's session. We hope to not have too many hiccups along the way, but if we do, please bear with us if we run into any technical issues. Currently, you are all in listen-only mode, and you do not need a microphone for today's webinar, just a headset and speakers to listen to audio. Now, today's session is also being recorded. You will be receiving the recording link later today, and you'll be able to review anything you may have missed, or please feel free to pass it along to anyone who's unable to join us. Now we have a raised hand feature that you all should be able to see. If you can please locate this feature, click on the hand to raise it, and I will know that you can hear my voice and that you're ready to continue. Great. Okay, great. It looks like everyone's responding, and you may all unraise your hand now and we will proceed. Now, about questions, I would like to call your attention to the questions option menu. Gary will be taking some breaks throughout his presentation to answer some questions. So feel free to type in your questions in the field. Be aware you may be asking a question that others have as well. So we will compile them and ask Gary throughout the session. Also, today's session will be held through view sharing demonstration. You can maximize your viewing area by hitting the maximize window button located at the top of your screen. You can also use the zoom feature located at the top left-hand corner of your screen for better viewing. Now, before we get started, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. New Horizons is excited to present information and provide tools to assist you with your professional development. As vocational schools, we are constantly working with you to achieve your employment objectives. Please feel free to reach out to your New Horizons career consultant for further information. If you do not currently have a career consultant, you are more than welcome to log on to our website at newhorizons.com and do a zip code search to find the nearest location to you. All right, I hope you enjoy this session, and without further delay, I'd like to hand over to our featured presenter, recruiting and corporate hiring consultant, Gary O'Neill. Gary, you are ready to go.
I am ready to go. Hi, Leslie. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me be here. We're here to talk about acing your interview. My name's Gary O'Neill. I run recruiting teams and have for quite some time. Just to give you a little bit of context, I've probably conducted, 10,000, more than 10,000 interviews probably, and certainly been around a lot more than that. Seen the feedback from so many interviews at all different levels. So I'm here today to kind of take all of those experiences I've had and all those stories that I've seen and all those occasions and share with you kind of the general patterns that I see in terms of the kinds of things that you can do to really increase the odds that you ace your interview and get to the next step. So that's what we're here to talk about. I really want to start by talking a little bit about the people who conduct interviews. So, you'll be in an interview, there's one or more other people in those interviews. And let's just for a second take a step back and understand the experience that the other individual is having. So the truth is, like, everything happens. There are recruiters, people like me, who conduct interviews, and we do that professionally. I've got clients who are hiring software engineers onto a software engineering team, and some of the people conducting those interviews will be other developers who've never conducted an interview before, ever. And so they're a little bit nervous about it. You'll have hiring managers who have done a lot of hiring and are very experienced in doing that. You may have, especially if you're like transitioning in IT or something, there are occasions when you're interviewing with a small company where the person doing the interviewing really doesn't have the ability to evaluate your technical ability because they don't know how to do it themselves. So every situation that you can imagine happens. There are people who are new to a career who are, junior recruiters who are interviewing people for pretty significant jobs that they don't necessarily even understand. So my point in all of this is that one of the things that we're going to kind of focus on is this notion of what is the problem that you're really there to solve. So I think of it from the perspective of, if I'm the interviewer, my job as a recruiter, as an executive recruiter, technical recruiting, running recruiting teams, is to really evaluate whether moving this individual forward in the process is going to be in the best interest of my client and is likely to be in the best interest of this individual as well, in terms of this being a great career opportunity and all of that. Is it worth moving forward, right? And that's my job as a recruiter. And in some sense, that's everyone's job when they're doing an interview. However, you're going to run into every different situation that's out there. So underneath it all is this notion of what is the problem that you're there to solve. So let me just introduce you to this. On the screen, you see acing your interview and landing the job, the PDF. This is a PDF that I'm going through, not a PowerPoint presentation. I'm also going to show you some things on the web, and I'm going to show you some stuff on LinkedIn. We're going to show you all kinds of stuff. But you might want to download this out of the handout section so that you can use this as a tool as you're as you're preparing for and getting ready for interviews. So I'm going to scroll down here a little bit, and here's what we're going to go over in this particular session. We're going to start off in the introduction talking about kind of what I was talking about just now, is that interviews are not really about you. They're really about your ability to solve a problem. And not only the problem that you'd be solving when you're on the job, but the problem that you have to solve as an interviewer is to be able to put your best foot forward so that the individual who is, or team who is interviewing you, sees you as the person who's going to be wildly successful in this role. So, that's the problem that you're solving in each one of those cases. So we're going to talk about the problem and really what the objectives of your interview are. A lot of our time is going to be spent in this section number 2, which is about preparation, preparing. Here's what I know. Regardless of how nervous you are or how extroverted you are, introverted, whatever and however you are is awesome. But no matter how you are, I rarely see people in an interview who I think are really properly prepared. And I think that if you're properly prepared, not only will you be less nervous, not only will you communicate better, but it will be clear that you're the kind of person who does what it takes to be successful in whatever it is that you do. So we're going to talk quite a bit about how to properly prepare for an interview, because I think that if you're prepared properly, then regardless of the style of answering interview questions or any of those kinds of things, that you'll have the resources to be yourself in the interview, to be seen for yourself in the interview, and do the best that you can. So I think that's the key, is in preparation. So we're going to spend a lot of time there. Section 3, we'll talk about how to perform in the interview, some techniques with respect to engaging with people and answering questions, and some things to think about. And then another real key section at the end is section 4, which is progress, what to do after the interview, immediately after, and follow up, because it can make a significant difference in terms of who moves forward in the process. So that's what we're here to talk about. It's all about the problem, how to properly prepare, how to perform really well in an interview to do the best that you possibly can, and how to progress things forward. All right. Yeah, so let's go. By the way, I do run with interrupts enabled, and like Leslie was saying, there are ways to add chat and add some questions and things like that. Behind the scenes, I'll be answering some of your questions online. Some of them I'll pause and answer. So if you have thoughts or questions or things, or maybe you disagree with me, whatever it is, let's we'll talk about those things. So I want to go back to this notion that it's all about the problem. And what I mean by that is that when you're interviewing, and ultimately when somebody's making a decision as to whether they want to extend you an offer to join their team, it's important to understand that that's one of the most expensive, the most risky, and the most important decisions that a company, and specifically a hiring manager, ever makes. And by the way, companies don't hire people, right? You know that, right? Companies don't hire people, people hire people, right? There's a hiring manager. It's not a title. It means the person who's ultimately going to make the call as to whether you are extended an offer. And generally, that's the same person who you're going to report to, who your supervisor is. I don't love the word boss, but you know what I mean? It's going to be that. That's the hiring manager. So it's always about a person making a decision about you. And the entire hiring process and the entire recruiting process is a series of decisions, starting with trying like your resume to make it through that screen. I mean, all of these steps are about people making these decisions. And if you understand that each one of the people in the process has a problem that they need to solve, as an example, as a recruiter, I need to solve both the problem of finding and identifying people, doing the early stage screening, making sure that this person is qualified, interested, and available, writing it all up, moving it forward, and essentially becoming the concierge and navigating everything through. That's the problem that I've got to solve. I mean, by the way, as a recruiter, I'm commonly will compliment people in terms of, hey, thanks for being so easy to work with, right? Be easy to work with. It makes a really big difference. All right, so my notion of this problem is that you can take the pressure off of yourself by understanding that the interview that you're going into, regardless of who the interview is with, is really not about you. It's really about your ability to solve the problem that the company's got and that individual who's conducting the interview has. That's really what it's about. And you might think about it in terms of, let's say you have a leaky roof on your house and you're going to call out some roofing contractors. Well, aren't you, in a sense, interviewing those individuals, right? I mean, you're deciding which of those people is going to get the contract to roof your house. And by the way, even if roofing your house is $25,000, that's a lot less expensive decision than hiring a person on board, a team. So for the hiring manager, for the hiring team, it's really critical and it's a very important decision. And some of them don't know how to interview. They're really nervous about it as well. And this decision that they have to make in terms of who's joining their team is just as important to their lives as the decision about what company you join and what teams you join is to your life. So let me just tell you just a little bit more about this notion is that there's two different problems that I'm talking about. One is that the company has a problem. The team that's hiring you, the hiring manager, they have some kind of a problem that needs to be solved. And that's the only reason why they're hiring anyone. No one ever hires anyone unless there's some problem that needs to be solved. So overall, your series of interviews is really about, are you the best choice with regard to the person who needs to solve these problems that need to be solved so that the company can increase its earnings, its quality, its customer satisfaction, whatever those problems are. On a more practical basis in an interview, in each interview, the person who's interviewing you has a problem that needs to be solved. And if you understand that, and in that interview, you're focused on helping that individual solve the problem that they have, it'll establish a lot better communication and things will move forward a lot more smoothly. I hope that makes sense. I think if it doesn't, it'll become clear as we move through things, but it's really all about your ability to solve the problem. Right here on this section right here says item 5, underlying interview questions. So, I'm kind of a curious guy. I kind of pay attention to subtle human behavior. And although I don't think that anyone who's conducting an interview could tell you this, but I think that there are really 5 underlying questions that are always going on when someone is interviewing you. And that is, who are you? I mean, who are you? Basically simple, hey, I'm Gary O'Neill. This is who I am. What problems can you solve? Do you understand how you can help me? And do you understand how solving those problems will help our business? All right, that's critical, by the way. It really makes you stand out. If I know what problems you solve, that's fine. That's the task you perform, the routers that you configure, the servers that you set up, the journal of the general ledger that you take care of, the medical billing and coding that you do, whatever it is that you do, right? I need to know about what problems can you solve. And then, do you understand how you can help me? And do you understand how doing what you do really will benefit our business? And that's a real turning point. That's a real separation point between the people who go into an interview with this idea of their ability to do the work is enough. And I guess it's enough, but it doesn't set you apart. What begins to set you apart is your ability to tie how you do what you do and those things that you can do and the tasks you perform and all to the success of the individual and to the team and to the company ultimately. Do you know why you're doing what you're doing and the difference that it makes, right? Do you have proof? Right? Do you have proof that you can do that? Right? Why should I trust that? Right? Because I need to have some notion. which, by the way, if you're in career transition, one of the best forms of proof that you can have is a certification. And the reason why is that, I mean, I clearly know that you're, if I'm interviewing you prior to the interview, I clearly know that you have, if you're in career transition, you haven't spent years doing whatever this is. So that I must be okay with that before I even am having this conversation with you. But during that conversation, I still want proof that you'll be able to do the things that need to be done so that me and my team and my company can be more successful. And if I look at the set of all people who are transitioning into, say, IT that have certifications and compare them against the set of all people transitioning in IT who don't, my risk goes down significantly with that set of people who have these certifications, particularly if I'm a small business and I'm not really sure how to do this stuff, so I'm not even quite qualified to screen you. That really shows me, gives me confidence with respect to qualifications, right? And then the fifth underlying interview question is it worth considering you further? In other words, is it worth moving forward in the process, right? That's really what it is. So I think the 5 underlying interview questions, if you think about it in terms of these are the kinds of questions that people don't know that they're asking, but you're there to answer is, who are you? What problems can you solve? Do you understand how solving those problems will make a difference in the lives of the people who you work with and the success of the business? Do you have proof that you're going to be at least okay and decent at doing these things? I mean, make me feel good, right? Make me feel comfortable. And really, my decision is it worth considering you further? Ultimately, considering you further is extending an offer, and hopefully you accept it by that point in time, and off we go, right? All right, well, I hope that makes some sense, because I think that this is really critical in terms of understanding really what you're there to do in an interview. And in an interview, I think that some people believe that they're almost a passive participant, which they're there to show up and people are going to ask them questions and they're going to give them answers. My advice is that if you understand that this is a conversation and a dialogue, and what you're really doing in this interview is going in to help to understand whether or not you're going to be able to help these people solve the problems that they have. And if by doing that, this is going to generate the income and create the kind of career momentum that you would like to have, right? So it's about a conversation is really what interviews are all about. This little section right here, 1.2 objectives of your interview, at some level it's to connect with that other person. It's to discuss the problem and how to solve it. And really the objective of your interview is simply to get to the next step. Now, eventually the next step is get an offer, and eventually the next step is start a job. But it's important to understand that each time it's just a step. And what I see people often doing is that, very often I'm the first person for some of the roles that we work on. I'm the first person that an individual talks to in terms of a recruit. I'm the first interview very often with the people who end up on the positions that I work on. And so in that particular case, right, the next step is getting to that next interview. Yeah, so it's about that, right? That's the objective of your interview, is to get to the next step. Oh, I remember what I was going to tell you, is that it's really interesting to me how often it is that people want to talk about things that they're curious about, but don't necessarily make a difference as to whether or not I'm going to move them forward in the process or not. And what I mean by that is that as a recruiter, early stage interview, just one just yesterday, as a matter of fact. So it's a network manager job. It's not a huge job. It's kind of a junior network manager job. And, the individual I was talking to, kind of thought you needed to know everything. Well, which platform are they on? Are they on this platform? Are they on this platform? And which are they, like, all this curiosity, which is fine. But in my head, I'm kind of going, do the answers to those questions, would they make any difference to you with regard to your interest in moving forward and talking to other people, right? And so, the real truth is the answers to none of those questions would have made any difference with regard to whether or not this individual would have been interested in moving forward in the process. And so by introducing those ideas, they become a little bit needy, right? And a little bit of yellow flags go off for me, right? Just a little bit. And it's all about getting to the next step. And so, and we're going to dive into all of this stuff in a little bit more detail, but as we move forward, but getting to the next step, pardon me, is really about if you think about it, every word, every phrase, everything that you say, every question that you ask, every answer that you give, really ought to be tuned for in the best that you can to increase the other person's interest in working with you. And so if you consider that as you're going through your interview, if you have questions that are just curious questions, and we'll talk about this a lot more, but you need to ask yourself, is there something about asking this question that's going to make this other person more interested in me? So as an example, if I'm talking to a senior vice president about something and I'm the first interview and the thing they want to ask about is like paid time off, like, really? I mean, you asking me about paid time off doesn't make me more interested in you. In fact, what an interesting question in this very first conversation. Huh. Wow. All right. So what's in it for you? Is that really what we're here to talk about? Not that those things aren't important. My whole point in saying that is that if you're aware of the role that the other person is playing, and you're aware of the fact that you're there to put your best foot forward and to spend the majority of your time talking about things that you believe are going to be in the best interest of the other individual and things that will be interesting to the other individual so that they can learn about you, then things are going to go much better. And the underlying key to success in doing that is to know that you're not in the interview to talk about you, and they're not there to evaluate you. You're there to discuss your ability to solve the problem. And one of the ways that you can know whether your interview went really well or not is it often starts out such that, it feels like the interviewer's on one side of the table, and sometimes they literally are. And you're on this other side over here, and you're across the table and you're answering questions, right? Get all fuzzy. Um, but you're answering questions, and it's kind of this question and answer kind of thing. That's fine. But where I know an interview really went well is if by the end of the interview, instead of looking at each other, you're both, I'm talking metaphorically, you're more or less both focused on the problem at hand. You're talking about how you would solve that problem, and you're already kind of working together on the ways to approach solving whatever problems it has. So if that happens in your interview, and you end up discussing with the other person details of the problem in some sense and your ability to solve it and thinking through some of these things, and things went really well in your interview if the focus shifted away from you and shifted on to the problem that that role is there to solve. All right. I hope that all makes sense. Hey, Leslie, what do you think? We got any questions or anything out there that we ought to address? This stuff is really important. I hope that it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And Gary, we do have a couple questions. I think you're going to touch on them.
Okay,
I'm just going to bring them up real quick so that you can
cool.
think about them as you're going. One of them is right in line with what you said. Here's a kind of an odd question that
Uh,
you may get in an interview. If you have one of your staff who's not motivated for work, doesn't achieve their task, what will you do?
right,
That is one of the questions this person has.
right.
And the other one is about, how to prepare for structured panel interviews. And I
Oh
have a
yeah.
feeling you're going to discuss all that.
Yeah, yeah, and remind me at the time too when we get there that we'll talk about some of those. So we'll talk about some of those.
Okay.
So my quick reaction to both of those, actually, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
is remind me the first one again. What was that specific question?
The first question is, if you have one of your staff who is not motivated for work,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't achieve their task, what will you do?
Wow, it's hard I'm in here and I know exactly what my answer would be to that question, but but I don't know that that's necessarily helpful, right? It's the general approach to answering questions, which we will get there. And the general approach is some kind of an introductory answer, a story to illustrate that example, and then some way to hand the question back in terms of, hey, does that make sense or did that answer your question, right? That one
Hmm.
specifically, if it were me, be along the lines of, well, once we're clear on what they're accountable for, then we ought to have, regular check-ins on where they're doing with that. And, it shouldn't be any surprise with respect to anyone in terms of the coaching and the support and the mentoring that they need. But ultimately, if we've done everything that we can and they're not able to achieve their goals, then sometimes we have to make a hard choice and, terminate people and move on to another one. But it'd be whatever your approach is to managing people clearly. Um, what was the second one?
The second one was, how do you prepare for structured panel interviews?
Oh, got it. So and we'll talk about this more, but my quick response to that is that I think that, if you think about it, that the panel is simply just multiple people and you're going to interact with each one of these people in the same way, then, I don't see them as that different. The one tip though that I can give you that's really important, I think, is that very often in a panel, you're going to have someone who's kind of the dominant player, sometimes the hiring manager, and everybody else is going to acquiesce to that other individual. And even if they're not acquiescing to this other individual, but you have some other people who are quieter in that, if you can, it's always a great idea to get those quiet people engaged in the conversation, because you can literally, in this back and forth, and we'll talk about an answering pattern, which is, taking the question, giving an initial answer, illustrating with a story. And then one of the things you can do to engage the less involved members is to hand it back to them. Hey, Linda, I'm just curious, did that answer your question? Does that answer the question? And I can actually hand the question back to someone who wasn't the person who necessarily answered it. So if I could say anything that's a key to doing well in panel interviews is take a little bit of responsibility for ensuring that everybody is engaged in the conversation, because very often they'll be dominated by one or two people. But we'll talk about that more in a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome. All right, so let's dive into the real meat of this. And the real meat of this starts with this whole notion of preparation, because here's what I believe. I believe that if you didn't hear anything I was telling you about the problem, and you didn't hear anything that we're going to talk about after this in terms of performing in the interview and what to do afterward, I believe that this section is the most important section, because if you do these things, then your interview will go well. Let me tell you a little bit about how if I were interviewing you, and let's say I was interviewing you at 1 o'clock today, about 10 or 15 minutes before 1 o'clock, kind of depending upon how important the role is and how big it is, but usually about 15 minutes before, I'll go to your record that's in our system. I'll go to your resume. I'll skip your resume. I'll usually go straight to your LinkedIn profile. And the reason why is because I can see where you worked. I can click on those companies. I can investigate those companies. I can see the size of them, what business, what industry they're in. So my point is that I'm pretty good at it, but I'd spend at least 15 minutes going and really evaluating and doing my homework with regard to who you are, where you've been, where you studied, like trying to gather as much as I can about your story prior to our interview. And honestly, I mean, because I've been doing it so long, in 15 minutes, I'm probably doing what would take somebody 30 or 45 minutes to do it if they don't interview very often. But my point is that I go do a considerable amount of homework on you. When I first have a conversation with people, normally one of the things that I first open up with is, let's just assume that I was interviewing Leslie. And so, after a little bit of small talk, what I'm going to say is, hey, Leslie, one of the things I want to do is I want to take you behind the scenes so you understand who we are and what we do and why we do it, a little bit about our company. So, because what I know is that if this isn't a good career move for you, then kind of nothing else matters. But why don't we start with what you know about our company, and then I'll kind of pick up the ball from there and kind of take you behind the scenes. So I'm going to pitch Leslie the ball and have her, tell me a little, what do you know about our company? We'll just start there, and I'll pick it up from there. I don't expect you to know a whole lot, so just let me know. 95% of the time, the answer is, well, I don't really know. I hadn't had time, or I checked the website, and I think you guys are, I think you do something in retail, maybe. And I'm kind of going, yeah, oh, right, okay, fine. Now, that doesn't get you out of consideration, because that's what 95% of people do. I'm still amazed I've done more homework than they have, really. And then on top of that, and I know a lot of you probably do more. Statistically, you don't, but each one of you, I'm sure that every one of you does. But the people who really set themselves apart are amazingly set apart. It's like, it might be, well, I know the company was founded about 16 years ago. You've got a couple of rounds of funding from Goldman Sachs. Went and looked at, I'd not only looked at your website, but I looked at these other things. And it appears you guys have about 175 employees and have hired about 30 people over the last period of time. And, I see that you guys have done these conferences. It doesn't have to be that elaborate, but the people who are able to say that I actually went and did my homework, and I actually understand something about you, and I understand something about the company and the job and the role, and I'm prepared, sends a very clear message to the person who you're interviewing with that you're the person who does what it takes to make things happen. And so there's little that you can do that means more with respect to your ability to ace your interview than being properly prepared. If you're properly prepared, then whoever you are, shy, aggressive, loud, quiet, however you are, you'll come across, because I mean, you are who you are, I mean, and come across as genuine, but the better prepared you are, anyway, I'll stop talking about that because it's just that important. So let's talk about how to properly prepare. So if I were preparing for an interview, and I was gonna say I'd move this to another screen so you look there, but I can't because then you can't see it. But it's all in the preparation. So let's start about the first thing you need, or it doesn't have to be in this order, but one of the really important things you need to be prepared for is you need to understand the company. Understand the company because people care that I can't universally say that all interviewers care whether you know anything about their company. What I can tell you is that enough of them do that it's really important to do that because it's one of the things that you can do to overcome this obstacle of this interview because the obstacle is keeping you from getting the offer. And by the way, that obstacle is really that other person is going to make a decision. And that other person is going to make a decision as to whether or not you move forward in the next step, right? So, they've got these problems that they have in this interview, which is they need to know who you are, what you can do, whether you can tie that to the success of their business, whether or not you have proof, and they're making the decision as to whether you move forward. My point is that understanding the company can really help you move forward because no one else really understands the company. So here's the thing, right on this screen here. Number one is to understand the company. I think that if you just answer the question, imagine that you're in an interview and I were to say, tell me a little bit about what you know about our company. You need to have an answer that's 1-2 minutes, less than 2 minutes. And the easy way to know that and to do that is to actually write a one-page summary. Just write one, like literally, like write one. And you might want to do it by hand because it seems to translate to the brain a little bit better, but it's not about just copying and pasting. I mean, you can do that, but it'll go a lot better. When I'm going to meet a new client, this is what I do. And so here's the outline that I have for you. And let me see if I can label these parts. So 1 second. I don't think I can type, but this one right here, let's just start right here. So this is just an outline. I think this is kind of a paint by numbers for how you can do your research on companies, which is it just starts with a simple statement like this. Retail online solutions helps, right? So name of company helps what kinds of customers solve this kind of problem. So the first statement is, company name blank helps these kinds of customers solve this kind of problem, right? So in this particular case, it's a made up company, but retail online solutions help small to medium online retailers drive targeted traffic to their client's website and convert their traffic into sales. All right. By the way, if you do this and you do this outline like that, you will sometimes have people in your interview ask you for, hey, can I have a copy of that? No one has ever described, I couldn't describe it. You may be able to describe their company better than they can, which was really interesting and impressive to people. So the first statement is a little bit about the company, and the pattern that I recommend is, this company, your company helps this type of client solve this kind of problem. The next statement right here, this one, right? I wish I could type. I don't think I can type. Let me look at that. No, I can't type. I'm gonna grab a highlighter though. All right, how about this one? So products and services. Now you can't see it, but if you have if you have the copy that you downloaded, you can. But they're products and services. So the company helps these customers solve this problem. The products and services, products or services or whatever, one or both, include this one, that one, and the other one. So in this particular case, include everything from initial design through launch as well as whatever it is. So again, you can kind of see the pattern, right? Company name helps these kinds of customers solve this kind of a problem. Their specific products and services include this one, that one, and the other one. All right, that's the pattern. Now we move to a key differentiator. A key differentiator is, in this case, the complete analytics built into each site. It doesn't really matter. The key differentiator that stands out is this, right? Sometimes it's a little hard to come up with, so this one's not nearly as critical as the others, but if you can do it, so much the better. Ideal clients are, these types of clients, so you dig into the clients a little bit more, and sometimes a company will be kind enough to tell you who their clients are on their website. So you can get, example clients include this one, that one, and the other one. And then you can start getting into things that maybe matter a little bit less, but all I can tell you is that I think that it matters enough, and I'm trying to get my scroller back, hang on a second. I think that it matters enough that this is what I do before I go on sales calls. And if, you know, before I would conduct an interview for a particular company, I would know these things about the company so that I could talk to you about them. So I figure that if it's worth my time to go investigate all of this stuff about a company so that you and I could have a meaningful interview, then maybe you ought to too. Right. And just know, here's one of the real cool things about this is that 95% of people don't. So by doing this simple little exercise, you just put yourself into that top tier, 5 to 10% of people who make the trouble, right? So make the trouble. And you don't have to do it exactly like this. This is just me giving you an example that's based upon if I could give you something to help you with this company, and if I make my living, I get paid because people get hired. And if I gave you this introduction, except for it'd be better if you went and did it yourself, but I gave you this kind of introduction to a company, I know that you'll do much better in the interview. All right, so let's just kind of finish this up real quick. This company helps these kinds of clients solve this kind of problem. Their products and services include this one, that one, and the other one. A key differentiator happens to be these. Ideal clients look like this. Example clients look like that. So any of these things that you can gather is all good. If you can get anything about the company culture, anything just general statement about them. And now you can get into location and size, right? They're in Austin. Hey, you guys got 5 offices, I think. Headquarters is here in Austin, right? You know, as far as I can tell, you guys got about 80 employees. Is that right? So, you know, these are simple things that you can go through. Current events, history, leadership. So if you just take this as an outline, and if you had this written down and you did this kind of homework on a company, 1 in 100 interviews go this far. And I think that unless they were just totally, really not qualified for the job, they would all move forward. The people who bother to do this tend to be the people that move forward in the interview process. All right. So let me show you where to get this information, right? Let me show you, because I think that sometimes you know that you need to do this. Sometimes maybe it's not as obvious where to go get it. So let me show you. Would that be good? Okay, cool. Because I want to show you something. All right. So we're going to go to, first of all, go to LinkedIn. I believe that I should say, the first place I go to review companies is LinkedIn. I mean, that's the first place I go to check out companies, because there's a very finite amount of space that that a company has to describe themselves, and it gives me a lot of information that their website won't. Their website is usually done by marketing people who, you know, their website might say, you know, we help companies solve their deepest problems through strategic and tactical solutions that integrate innovative, you know, capabilities into whatever, right? Whatever. In LinkedIn, it tends to be a lot more succinct than that. So let me just show you. Now, let's say that you are going to interview at a company called Revionics, let's just say. So we're going to click on Revionics. And by the way, this is not an upgraded account. I'm up here at the top. Let me show you this again. When you click on this search up here, you can search for people, jobs, content, companies. You know, if you have a hard time finding the company by just typing the company name in here, you can click companies. And then what it'll do is it specifically would let me search for companies named Revionics. So you can pick up there what thing you're searching for. I could search for Revionics and people, because if I search for Revionics in companies, it gives me a list of companies. If I search for Revionics in people, see that? Revionics in people. This is really valuable too, by the way, if you're going to go interview. You know, now I got a list of people who are at Revionics, but I'm going to go back to the company. Let's go look at the company. All right. So the first thing I do when I come to one of these pages is on this very first page, I kind of look right here and I say, see all 189 employees on LinkedIn. What I know is that Revionics is a computer software company, which means the majority of their employees will have a profile that's on LinkedIn. But since it says 189, that's how many people have profiles that list Revionics as their current position. And so that tells me is they're a little over 200 employees, right? There'll be a handful who don't have a profile, so a little over 200 employees. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go click on this. See over here, the About tab. And the reason why I'm going to go here is they only give a company about this much space to fill it out. And very often, this is a lot of the answer that you need. So let's check this one out. Revionics is a global SaaS provider of science-based pricing, promotion, space, and competitive insights for innovative retailers. All right, pretty dang close, right? Revionics helps these kinds of companies, innovative retailers, solve these problems with related to pricing, promotion, space, and competitive insight, right? This is awesome. I really didn't prepare this in advance, but it sure fits, doesn't it? Revionics helps retailers around the world gain a competitive advantage. So here it is. So my number one suggestion to you in terms of how to go prepare for an interview with regard to getting to know about the company is right here on LinkedIn. Other things you'll see here, and I suggest that what you do is you click through all of these things and you look through all of this stuff, but let me show you a few that are of particular interest, right? So you can get to their website, industry doesn't matter, but company size, it tells you that right here, where their headquarters are at, when they were founded, right? What their specialties happen to be, where their offices are. Look at that. So see how much information I get right here. Home is usually a lot less interesting. At one time, LinkedIn, I think, thought they were going to be a social media site. So, this is kind of like posts, but most companies don't do this a whole lot. 3 weeks, 1 month, they do it some. So you can find some current events here, perhaps, right, by looking through that list. I can look at any jobs that they might have posted. They have a lot more jobs than that. Most companies don't post jobs on LinkedIn. It's really expensive. So most jobs are never posted here. You can click on the People tab and you can, here we go. It'll come up here in a second, I promise. It's just being slow. You can sort it by where they live or where they've studied in school, and you can see a whole list of people who work here. This is probably not the best way to go look at people, but you can do it here, and so on and so forth. So this is the key place to get information. You can go to their website, of course, and so let's just take a quick look at Revionics website. Come on, Revionics, here we go. All right, look at this. Now look what Revionics did for us. Look, right here, before they paid, the first thing that came up is AppTech, BJ's, Pharma, Dick's, Sporting Goods, right? So look, and the Home Depot, they just gave me a list of their clients. And so what I know is that when in this About section, they say, by the way, when I'm looking down, of course, my camera's up here, and my keyboard and my screen are down here. Helps retailers around the world, right? Now we have some idea of the type and type of retailer. So we're not talking about little retailers. We're talking about big retailers. And look at that. There's one that must be either in Russia or that's Slavic. So there's global stuff right there. So now we just got this whole section. So there's so much that you can do, but rather than getting all bogged down in all of the details of it, I guess what I'm suggesting, I'm going to close this down for a second, is that you understand the company, gather this kind of information, write about one page, know what it is, so that even if somebody doesn't give you the opportunity to say it, you can form questions. You can certainly in an interview say, hey, I understand that you guys have 5 offices. That's really cool. Have you ever had a chance to go to the London office? Oh, wow, no, that would be great, huh? Okay, cool. So, you can use it in all kinds of ways to establish a relationship, to ask questions about it. What accounts have you been involved in? I understand that you guys are on the Home Depot account. That's on your website. I mean, have you got the opportunity to work on the Home Depot account? I'm curious. So be curious about the person who you're interviewing with. There's, that makes people like you, by the way. All right. So that's it on understanding the company. Pretty straightforward, but I suggest you dig pretty deep, and I suggest that you know all of these kinds of things, because I promise you, no one else will. And you'll find a way, if they're not asking you about it, find a way to weave this information into the conversation, and things will go really well. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is to define the problem. And this one's a little bit tricky. What I mean by define the problem is that The only reason why they're considering hiring someone is they have a problem to be solved. And sometimes it's a great problem, which is they have new business and they just don't have enough people to deliver it and they're growing like crazy. That's the best problem to have. Sometimes their problem is something's literally broken. Sometimes their problem is somebody just quit. Sometimes their problem is, there's all kinds of problems that companies have, but no company ever goes, you know what, let's just hire somebody. I mean, we should add somebody to the team. We don't really have anything that they need to do, but so it's always about the problem. By the way, the problem that you solve is never the tasks that you perform. Do you know that? And what I mean by that is that I perform tasks like sourcing and interviewing and screening and writing email messages and job descriptions and leading a team of other recruiters. And I mean, those are the tasks that I perform, but that's not the problem that I solve, because my clients don't care that I do all those things. They don't even want to know about it. I mean, they need to know that I'm good at it and they need to understand that I've got proof that I'm good at it. But the problem that I'm solving is helping an organization hire somebody who's going to help them achieve their goals, and specifically helping the hiring manager add someone to their team who's going to help them sleep easier at night, who's going to be easy to work with, and is going to help the manager achieve their goals to, make things happen. So, that's the problem that I have to solve. And so what I'm encouraging you to do is that if you have a job description, the job description is typically going to list the requirements or the tasks that you're going to have to perform. It's probably not always going to say a lot about the problem that you're there to solve. The problem that you're there to solve ultimately is along the line, it's usually either about saving money or making money, or it's about improving quality or saving time, which is almost the same thing as saving money, but sometimes it's a little bit different, right? Sometimes it's a little bit different. But in some way, shape, or form, there are these things that as a result of the work that you do, results are going to occur. And that's what I really mean about the problem. So occasionally a job description will say, decrease, decrease employee turnover by 10%. It will rarely say something like that, but that's what we're really trying to get to. So you can define the likely problem. So let me talk to you about a couple of ways to define the likely problem. And again, what I'm trying to get at is your skills, your tasks you perform, those kinds of things. I mean, that's jacks are better to open, which means that's a card reference. I don't know if you all know that, but it's really about your ability to do the work is necessary, but it's not sufficient with regard to you being the person who's chosen for the role. But we're getting into that area where when we cross over between what can you do and into do you understand how it impacts my business, we're at that intersection right now when we're talking about the problem. So here's a couple of ways to get the information about the real problem that you're there to solve, which is you can take the job description, you can track out things that aren't problems, like be a good communicator. I mean, that's not the problem that you're solving. Right? Take that one off the list. Be prompt and on time. That's not the problem that you're there to solve. The thing is about if you're in this role and you're doing those things, as a result of that, what's better? How did it impact somebody else? What difference did it make that you did what you did? You can ask the recruiter. If you're working with a recruiter or whoever's setting up the interviews, hey, I'm just curious. Tell me a little bit more about this particular role as a result of doing that kind of stuff. I mean, what does success look like? So you can ask the people who you're working with. Why not? It's shocking to me how rare it is that anyone asks me that. And if you were a candidate of mine, I'll generally say, hey, we should set a time. I can give you a little bit insights into the person you're talking to and how to put your best foot forward. About 80% of people tell me, no, I'm good. I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me, really? So ask your recruiter, ask the administrative assistant, whoever it is that you're working with, you can ask them. Google for old job descriptions. Look at LinkedIn profiles of the people who are currently in the job. That will generally give you some pretty good insights. So let me show you that real quick, because I think that this is kind of cool and it's kind of important. So if I go back here to LinkedIn, right, and I'm going to click on search up here at the top, and I'm going to click on people. And, actually, let me show you a little bit better search than this. We have a session called Leveraging LinkedIn. I dive a lot more into how they use LinkedIn itself. But when they change it, we'll just go this route. So I'm going to search for people. If you ever search for people, it's going to bring up this little thing up here at the top. Check out this. When you click all filters, right, all filters, you get to filter on all this stuff. So what we're looking for is people who are currently at Revionics, right? Um, and if we're interviewing for a software engineer job, I'll first just run it on Revionics and I'll see how many people work at Revionics. There's 187 results. And so if I was into, if I want to narrow it down and I'm interviewing for a machine or a scientist role, then what I can do is I can scroll down here a little further and I can say title, scientist, and click apply. And there we go. I got 5. I got Alexander Braylon, who's a machine learning scientist, a machine learning scientist, a machine learning scientist, a data engineer. So if I were going to interview for a machine learning scientist role at Revionics, I would probably go check these people out and see if I can't understand a little bit about who they are and what their backgrounds are, because that might give me some insight into the problem, right? Into the problem that they're going to solve. That's interesting information too, because if I was interviewing with the hiring manager whose name is Jared, this is one of my clients. But if I was interviewing with Jared, then no one who's interviewing with Jared would say, "Hey, Jared, looks like you got a team of what, about 5 people? Alexander's been on your team for a while now. He was over at UT. Wow, they got a great engineering program, is what I understand." So my point is that not only can you understand more about the problem, you can understand more about the people and use that to begin to make, connections and have insights into the company. All right, so there's that. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. And then this one I think is really powerful, which is conceptualize the problem. By the way, let me reorient us as to where we are. We're getting prepared for the interview. Our first step was to really understand the company. The next thing we want to do is we want to really understand the problem that this company have, which is the reason why they're hiring. And what we're doing is we're taking the job description, which is going to be full of tasks, and trying to figure out as a result of performing these tasks, what's likely to be better. And then we're going to talk to whoever's setting up the interview. We're going to go look for other people who are there and see if we can't get some insights, because all of this together will start putting together kind of a picture for you to kind of understand what's going on. And then you can always conceptualize what's going to happen too, because you kind of go, all right, if I know that I'm interviewing for a IT support job at a automobile, a company that owns multiple automobile, Champion Auto, right? And they own 5 different dealerships, and those 5 different dealerships in 3 different cities. And I look at the size of them. I see how many employees they have. I know that they have salespeople. I know that one's a Ford dealership and another's a Toyota dealership and another one's a, whatever it is, different types of dealerships. I can begin to conceptualize what it means to be in IT there, because I can kind of go, all right, we got multiple cities, so we probably have some kind of a VPN set up. We got salespeople who probably have devices. They probably have mobile devices that they're going to look up stuff in inventory while they're talking to people. We probably got Toyota probably has a totally different inventory system than Ford has, then maybe different finance systems, and some of it's going to be secure. So we're going to have PCs and stuff that are in the offices, right? I can begin to figure out what's going on. And so by the time I got to the interview for a IT support role, I understand the problem, which is, wow, you guys got 5 different dealerships, and I had no idea so many people worked at a dealership. You got like 700 employees. Well, you got the corporate office, plus you got each one of those offices, people who are in there, plus the salespeople, plus service and support. Wow, okay, this is a much bigger organization than I thought. And then, so, I mean, that just sets a tone, not only in terms of you did your homework, but you now know the scope of the problem. You got 500 people. Did you find anybody else online who was in IT support? Because you might only find 2 people and you're kind of going, okay, wow, I'm joining a team of 2 people who's supporting 5 different dealerships in 3 different cities and all these different platforms. Whew, okay, wow. So do I know that for a fact? No, I don't know for a fact that there's nobody else. And I mean, I don't know any of these things for facts, but I'm beginning to build a picture so that I can begin to understand that the person I'm interviewing with, who is the hiring manager for the set of dealerships, probably has a problem in that they're probably overworked. They probably look like a really small IT staff. They got these multiple kinds of things. And so I can begin to feel that individual's pain and begin to understand how I could help that person be successful. Because the thing that always gets you to the next step in the interview and always gets you the offer is when somebody says, wow, by hiring you is going to make my life so much better, right? That's, people make decisions. And ultimately, I'm not going to hire you if you're not good at what you do and if you're not qualified to do your work, obviously. And those are the kinds of things that's, of course, the things that set you apart are, do you understand our business? Do you understand our company? Do you understand why it is that you're here? And those are the kinds of things that, even if the person who's interviewing you doesn't recognize it, those are the things that set you apart because it's rare. I mean, because it's rare. So understand the company and then do the best that you can to understand what the job is really going to be like, not just in terms of the tasks you're going to perform, but why are you there and what is the likely company's problem. Does that make sense? All right. Hey, Leslie, what do you think? Questions, comments? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And actually, we do have a couple questions, but I think you're on a roll, and I think that these questions will actually potentially be answered
Okay.
as you go. So
Okay,
if
great.
not, we'll bring them up.
All
Okay.
right, perfect. Yeah. Oh, well, I was going to try to change my color, but it just gets worse. All right. Now
Nah,
I'll
you
be
look great. You look
now I'll
fabulous.
be now I'll be all red. All right. Yeah, so that's it about solving the problem. So where we're at is we understand the company and we have some notion of what our problem is there, like what does success look like? What are we really there to do? And by the way, if you stopped right now, you'd still be head and shoulders above most candidates who are interviewing for jobs. So you're doing pretty good right now. But the next thing, and this one's really important, is know the interviewer. Have you ever been to an interview and didn't even know the name of the person you're talking to? Have you ever been to an interview and didn't bother to look them up on LinkedIn? Have you been to an interview and you didn't see who the people it was that they worked with or where they went to college or any of that? Have you ever been to an interview and didn't know those things? Statistically, most of you or many of you have never known any of those things. And I'm here to kind of say, why? Are you kidding me? I mean, really? What I understand is that my ability in a interview as the interviewer and as a recruiter, my ability to kind of get in to really understand you, to really understand your motivations, to really understand what drives you, what your story is, and whether or not the path you've been on intersects well with my client's path and whether or not y'all are going to create success together, it is because I try to get to know you. And I think that if you do the same, things will go so much better. And by the way, if you were on the phone with me as the interviewer, a lot of interviewers won't have done their homework, right? You've been on interviews where they probably hadn't even looked at your resume before. But what I can tell you is that imagine that I do, and I understand that about you. I mean, how much more engaging and how much more interested are you going to be in me? You get my goal as a recruiter is you get off the phone, you say, wow, that didn't even feel like an interview, right? I've learned so much. If you take the same approach that I take, I'm just talking to people. It just so happens that I'm the one who's making the decision as to, that's not even true. I'm not always the one who's making the decision. Sometimes the candidate makes the decision to not move forward or not. But so we both get to make a decision, right? But so it doesn't really matter what side of the equation it is, that if you understand the other person and you've taken the time to do it, they will be more interested in you and they will be more engaged with you because you went to the trouble and because it feels good when somebody's interested in you, right? We're not playing any games. I'm not playing games. I'm just saying that it will serve you well to know the interviewer. Okay, cool. So ask who the interviewer is, right? Try not to go into an interview unless you know who they are. And in fact, whoever's setting up the interview, if you're talking to them, say, hey, what is Tim like? Tell me a little bit about Tim. Is he really talkative? Does he like lots of stories? I mean, I want to use my time well. What are some of his priorities? What can you tell me about how can I put any advice for me with regard to putting my best foot forward with regard to the things that, he thinks are important and the business priorities that are in front of Tim? Can you tell me a little bit about that? And a lot of times people will go, what? No, I don't know any of that kind of stuff. But you never know. You might ask someone like me who's kind of going, all right, I'm so glad you asked that question because I got a lot to tell you. So you never know, but ask, right? If you're talking to somebody, ask. Another kinds of things. So, where do they go to school? What kind of area? But another great way to do this is to go to LinkedIn and find out about the person or find out about people in your network. So let me show you how to do that. It's really pretty easy, I think. So if I knew that I was interviewing with Jared Carlson, right? I'd go here and I'd say Jared Carlson, super nice guy, by the way. All right. So if I was going to interview with Jared, I mean, here we go, right? I mean, I can see what he has to say about himself. I can see that he's been there for almost 6 years. I can see that he has significantly advanced in his career there. So he must be highly regarded, right? Hey, Jared, wow, I see that you went from being data science analyst all the way up to data science engineering and senior manager and like, wow, congratulations. I mean, you've done a lot here, right? There you go. Quantitative analyst before that, a math professor, research assistant, right? Master's degree in applied statistics. So, you know, I know all of that about Jared. The other thing that I can find out about Jared is right here. I can see who mutual connections are. So it might be the case that when I connect on these 33, if I were going to interview with Jared, it might be the case that I know Frank Clanen really well. And so I might reach out to Frank and say, hey, Frank, I got an interview that's coming up with Jared Carlson. Dude, what can you tell me? I mean, how can I put my best foot forward? Tell me a little bit about Jared, right? Do you know him? And so, I can go get some insights from these people. But by the time I go in, I'm going to know about Jared. I'm also going to come right here to Google and I'm going to say, Jared, by the way, as recruiters, we do this to you, right? You do know that, right? I mean, I'm going to Google you. I mean, it's our job, right? I was talking to somebody the other day. Their inspection sticker was up, right? Their car tag or whatever it is was up there in inspection, and they're like, oh, man, I'm kind of going. You don't. I mean, it's the police job to like notice your tag, so you probably ought to get that fixed. It's our job, right? This is what we do. Jared Carlson. Um, so there's all kinds of things I'm going to do. One, I'm going to click on images. It's interesting kind of sometimes what you find out through images. I've seen things that were really bad articles on front pages of newspapers about people that are there. There's all kinds of stuff, right? So I'll check out that. I want to check out news, see if there's anything news. And for most people, there's not, right? But see how fast it is to go do this. So, I would go in and I promise you, because I've done it before, discovery videos. So Jared's got some videos that are online. He's got some webinars that he's done. You could even watch some of his stuff. You could hear his voice in advance. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Hey, I was online on retail, whatever it is the other day. I saw one of those webinars that you did about 4 months ago. That was really interesting. I learned this, that, and the other. I had no idea. See how powerful that is? No one does that, by the way. You will be the only person who does that. So by definition, you'll stand out. Okay, so here we are. So where we're at is know the company, and we know how to do that now, right? You even got an outline for that. Know the problem and really the problem that you're there to solve. If you can't get past, I'm there to image laptops and configure routers and setup. Sorry, if you can't get past that, that's fine. I mean, those are the tasks you perform. If you can get past that, which is as a result of doing those things, how does it matter to the person who's hiring me? And, how does that impact the success of the company? Which clue, that might be good questions for you to ask when it's your turn to ask questions, right? How does me doing a great job in this role, how does that help you? How will that help your career? How will that help? I mean, tell me a little bit more about that. So show your interest in the person who's about to make the decision because you're there to actually make their life better. I mean, that's kind of the reason, right? And I'm not talking about it in any personal sort of way. I'm talking about in terms of their hair's on fire. They need your help. They wouldn't be hiring you if they didn't need your help. Somebody needs your help. Make sure that they know that you care. And then know the interviewer, right? Find out about that person. It's delightful to people when you know things about them. It's delightful to people when you know about their company. It's delightful to people when you ask them about it. They like it a lot and you learn things. All right, cool. So know the company, know the problem, know the interviewer. We're spending a lot of time on this because this is the most important section, but know yourself is this next section. And what I mean by know yourself is it's not about, I should change that. It's not about knowing yourself. The ability to describe yourself in a way that's relevant and compelling to others is a fundamental job search skill. Right? The ability to describe yourselves to others in a way that's exciting, interesting, compelling, relevant is really important. In fact, it doesn't have to be exciting. It doesn't have to be all those things, but describing yourself in a way that's succinct, really clear, and relevant is a fundamental skill, and it's one that we can all learn. All of these things are all things we can learn. So I think that you need to have a really great answer to, so tell me about yourself. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What are you going to do? That's a kind of a moment of truth kind of thing. So I'll share with you, I do that a lot in interviews. So tell me a little bit about yourself. And it's really interesting. I mean, it gives people the opportunity. Sometimes people do such a great job that I really, really, really appreciate it. It really helps me a lot. Most of the time they don't, and I'll kind of cut it off, not in any polite, in a very polite sort of way. I don't think you'd even know that I was cutting it off, but here are the two most common answers that I get to. So when I suggest, so just tell me a little bit about yourself. The most common one is, well, I was at XYZ over at ABC company, and I did this task, and this other task. And before that, I was over at XYZ company and in a role like this, and I did this, and I did that, and I did this other thing. And so they give me a title, they give me a list of things they did, and they move backward in time. And I'll cut that off pretty quick. It's like, hey, thanks so much. Much of that's on your resume and the rest. We'll dive into that. So, and off we go. Or another really common was, well, I work really hard and I'm a this and a that, and I'm a father, and you start going into like your personality and your, the missing piece for a lot of people when somebody has this notion of, of suggesting, so tell me a little bit about yourself. The piece that somehow people aren't hearing is that what people are actually saying is, so tell me, if you were in an interview with me, what I'm really saying is, tell me a little bit about yourself with regard to your ability to be wildly successful in this role, to not only do the task that you need to do, but to make my life a whole lot better and understand what it is that you do and how that impacts the business. So tell me a little bit about yourself, right? In the context of the job that we're talking about and my life as the hiring manager or the interviewer or the recruiter or whatever it is, and talk to me about that. So that's the missing part in that question. It's not really about you. And it's not. I mean, I don't really want to know about you. I mean, I do on a human level, but not in this case. I mean, it's all about who are you? What do you do? Do you understand how you can solve, help me in my business? Do you have proof? And I got to decide whether or not I consider you further. So where we're at with this is in preparing, and I'm suggesting that you prepare to be able to respond to, so tell me about yourself, and doing it as a bunch of jobs moving backward or even forward in time probably isn't the way to go. It's okay, it's what everybody does. It makes you the same as everybody else. And describing yourself personally and the rest, or even professionally, it's fine. But here's what you can do instead. This is how I present people to hiring organizations and hiring managers and the rest, right? So if I had interviewed you and you were a professional who was moving forward in a process to be considered to be hired by one of my clients, and you and I had interviewed, literally the way that I will write the email message, or I usually pick up the phone call to present you over, is I'd say, and let's assume your name is Sally, I'd say, Sally is a certified IT specialist, and with a significant understanding of IT security. Her preferences are to help small to medium-sized businesses, really improve user satisfaction, to make sure that things are really running smoothly, that people in the company are able to be more productive because, so I describe it that way. The problems that she really likes to solve are related to user level kinds of problems, whatever it is. The skills that she has specifically includes this one, that one, and the other one. Her current situation is this. When's a good day and time for you to have a conversation with her? So I use this framework in presenting people to people who are going to interview them. And the reason why I use it is because it works. I've kind of honed it over the years, and not to be crude or anything, but I make my living because people get hired. And what I know is that in terms of kind of packaging things up, I've tried so many different approaches that this is the one that more often than not makes things move forward. So, if I'm using that to present you to organizations so that they can hire you and I can get paid, then it might work for you too. So it goes something like this. I am a blank and a blank, which you can pick titles, if you will, that go into those things. Usually, title or maybe one step removed. I'm a blank and a blank. I help these kinds of companies. And in an interview, you really want it to be, I help you, right? Is really the feeling that you want somebody to have. The problems that I really love to solve are this one, that one, and the other one. By the way, the problems you love to solve, That's the level above the task that you perform, right? As a result of the work that you do, what happens. If you're an auto body mechanic, then the problem you love to solve is fixing people's cars so that they look like they were never damaged in the first place, ensuring that every blemish is there and that we deliver a product to the client that they're going to be happy with and it's bright and shiny. I mean, that's the problem that you solve. Using skills like this hammer and this ping and this thing and all these skills that it takes to do auto body stuff. I mean, it's magic sometimes the people who can do it really well. Um, yeah. So this is the outline. So if you're transitioning into IT, and by the way, if you're transitioning, that doesn't necessarily appear here. Clearly, if you're in transition and somebody's interviewing you, they probably already know, and you probably don't have to tell them. You being in career transition doesn't make them more interested in you. I mean, they must be okay interested in you, but it doesn't make, no one ever says, when I'm talking to hiring managers and they talk to me about the profile of who they really like to hire, 0 times does somebody say, I'd really like to hire somebody who's in career transition. It's not that they have a problem with it. It's just that they also don't say, I'd like to hire somebody with purple hair. I mean, uh, there's just things that people don't care about. And so those are things that sometimes people don't care about. But what they do care about is your ability starting today to join their team and to make a difference as soon as you can and to make an impact on their lives and their business. And so it goes like this, I am a IT specialist and a certified IT security professional, with A plus, Network plus, Security plus certifications. I help, busy IT managers like you ensure that, users are productive, that company assets are protected, and that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that IT assets are making a difference for the business. Specifically, my skills are in these areas in terms of imaging laptops and this Windows thing and this other Microsoft server thing and this Cisco thing and those kinds of things, right? And that's the story about yourself. And so I think that if you have a way to tell your story, starting with today, who you are, what you do, the problems you solve, the skills you have, and project that out into the future, then that's going to paint a. People don't hire you for your past, they hire you for what they believe is going to happen in the future. And so, given the opportunity to describe yourself in the future, don't describe yourself in the past as much, right? It's all about, I am a this and a that with this thing that makes me unique. I help people just like you and busy executives and these kinds of companies solve these kinds of problems using these skills and stuff that I have. And this is where I'm taking my career. Are you with me? Right? I mean, you won't go that far at an interview, but I don't know, maybe you will. But that's the feeling of your talent brand summary. Okay, cool.
Hey, Gary,
Yeah, yeah.
do you mind if I stop you for 1 second?
No, please.
This would be a good time to ask you this question. One of the questions is, how can this technique be applied, for example, to a medical office type interview, something that's not as maybe easy to find online as maybe IT kinds of information? Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, I think that the process is essentially the same. It will just be the case that sometimes information is more difficult to gather. Sometimes it's really easy. I mean, Revionics, and I'd really never gone and looked at that before, they just served it right up to us, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it was really easy. There are other times where it's not going to be so easy to gather all of this information. If it were me, and let's just say it was an organization where it's very difficult to gather much of that information, if I was interviewing with you, I might come in and say, hey, Leslie, it was really interesting. I tried to go do my homework. It's a really, really little bit difficult. The only thing I was able to find out is that you guys were founded about this. It seems like about that many people. I'm really, really curious about that. So you can still get on the table that you went and did the work, even by describing to the person that you weren't able to gather a whole lot of information. So, I mean, that's what I would do. It's about having a story to tell. And if you went and did the homework and you got the information, then now that's the story that you're going to tell. The other extreme is you went and you did this and you're kind of going, wow, you guys are amazing. You're so stealth. Are you stealth on purpose? Is that something you're supposed to do? So maybe you turn the lack of information into the story of what you did to go gather it, but you'll still get credit.
Got it. Okay. And actually, I think that even helps create questions for the interviewer as well.
Oh yeah.
Additional questions.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Particularly things about the individual or things about the company that are kind of these missing gaps. So sometimes it's a lot harder than it is in other times. But you
Okay.
can still sometimes imagine, you can kind of go, let's say that I'm interviewing for these organizations that do ABA therapy, behavioral therapy for autistic children, as an example. I can still probably find out that you got 3 different locations and they're probably in this city, that city, and the other city. I can probably get a little bit of an idea. In fact, I could even call in and ask somebody, whoever answers the phone, and say, hey, I know that this is going to be a little bit of a weird question, but I got an interview that's coming up with Dave next week. Dave, what's such and such? Do you happen to know Dave? He's responsible for the therapy department. Okay, cool. So I want to put I mean, you can even call in. How many people work there? I mean, they may not answer your questions. You'd have to go about it the right way,
Mhm.
but you can even call in and ask people who are actually there. And even if you can't get that, you can say, hey, I'm guessing that each one of your locations, I drove by a couple of them, probably like that. You probably got about this many people. So the fact that you went to the trouble and made the speculation about it will get you a whole lot of credit and it makes you interesting.
Perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, cool. So now we know how to know the company. Now we know how to know the problem. Now we know how to know the interviewer, and now we know how to present ourselves, right? How you present yourself is going to make a really big difference. So I don't know if this is what you were prepared thinking we were going to talk about in terms of acing your interview, but I think this is the answer to acing your interview because I don't care what personality you are. I don't care whether you're quiet or shy or outgoing or huge or tiny or whatever you are. That's great. Please do you, as the saying goes, you do you and I'll do me. So please do you. But if in doing you, you come with caring, right? You cared enough to bother and you're showing that this matters enough to you because isn't this a really important life decision? It's a really important decision. So surely you figured out some things. So no matter who you are, how you are, or however you behave, or however you answer your questions, or whether you stumble or whether you flop sweat, no matter what happens, you'll be one of the only people who've done all this work, and you'll be one of the few people who's really properly prepared. And the truth of the matter is that when it all comes down to the wire, if a company is lucky enough to have multiple people who they'd be interested and willing to hire, and they all have the ability to do the work, I'd be willing to bet you the majority of the time the offer will go to the person who did this homework because you'll be better armed. I guarantee you that that's going to be the case. All right. Okay, cool. Your talent brand summary. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about preparing how to respond to questions. All right, so we know the company, we know the interviewer, we know the problem, we know ourselves. Now let's talk in general about great responses to, or how to craft a great response to a question, because you're probably going to be asked a couple. Although if I was coaching you to do an interview, people often ask me, what questions should I ask in an interview? My answer is like, don't ask any questions. You're not there to ask questions, you're there to gather information. And to give information to people. It's about a conversation, but still people tend to ask questions in interviews. So you'll probably be asked questions. I'm not sure I ask questions in interviews that I do. So, but um, let's talk about how to respond to questions, because the list of possible questions is so long, we could be bored to tears with that for days and never talk about all the different insane and weird and relevant questions that somebody might ask. So it's kind of pointless to go down that path. But instead, let's talk about the general structure of a engaging answer to a question. So item number 1 here, which is 2-minute answers. It really ought to say 1 to 2-minute answers. Here's what's been proven in psychology over and over and over and over and over in these kinds of situations and these kinds of dialogues, is that when you give a really short answer and you don't illustrate with some kind of an example and your answer is less than 30 seconds long, then oftentimes people will feel like you didn't take it all that seriously. And the feedback I get from hiring managers was, man, talking with Bob felt like pulling teeth. Well, that notion of it felt like pulling teeth means that Bob probably gave really short answers and didn't elaborate at all. And it just feels like somebody isn't that serious or they aren't considered. It makes people uncomfortable. Let's spin it the other way. It makes people more comfortable if you fill out your answers to your questions, right? And so know what 30 seconds feels like, know what 1 minute feels like, know what 2 minutes feels like, because just like I do sometimes, I get on a soapbox and I bore you. you become boring when you're on a topic for more than about 2 minutes. So know what 2 minutes feels like. Don't go over that. Know what 30 seconds feels like. Give it at least that. 1 minute is a pretty good period of time to give a sufficient answer. I'm going to go to item number 3 here, which is the pattern for a great answer. So there's so many ways to answer questions, right? I'm not here to say, here's the way to answer a question, but a really good way to answer a question is, first of all, to give an introductory answer. And what I mean by that is somebody said, hey, are you familiar with working with red widgets? My initial response is, well, as a matter of fact, I haven't spent much time working with red widgets, but they're related to blue widgets, and I've actually spent a considerable amount of time working with regard to blue widgets. So if you don't mind, then let me tell you about blue widgets and give you an example of that and what I know about the relationship between blue widgets and red widgets, right? So no matter what, I'm giving you an introductory answer. If the answer, let me simplify that. Somebody says, hey, have you ever worked with red widgets? I'm gonna say, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have worked with red widgets. In fact, a number of different times. And then what I'm gonna do is you're gonna move from this introductory answer, because you basically echoed back to them what they said, along with a little bit more detail. And then a great pattern is essentially say, hey, let me give you an example. Would that be all right? And sometimes I'll actually pause, right? Because the idea of, getting permission, right? It makes people feel good. But you can certainly say, here's the introductory answer. Here's a quick response to it. Let me give you an example. And then you can know that example, 30 seconds, 1 minute, no more than 2 minutes, and illustrate that. And then, if you think of question and answers like playing ball, when they ask a question, somebody just threw you the ball, you have the ball, and instead of just stopping your answer, how about hand the ball back? And the way you hand the ball back is, one of the best ways is by using a question. And the easiest question is, did that answer your question? Would you like to know more about that? Is there anything else you'd like to know? Or sometimes that, hey, related to that are blue widgets. Are you interested at all? Do you guys ever use them? I mean, is that something? Okay, great. No, red widgets, awesome. They're better than blue widgets anyway, right? Whatever it is. So the idea is somebody asks a question, you receive it, you echo it back just a little bit. Yeah, sure, I've used red widgets before. Let me tell you about that. I'm giving you an example. Tell you the example, fill it out, and then they'll hand it back with some kind of a transition, and questions are often a very great transition. And the easy one is, the easy one's the one that I stumble over, which is, let's see, it's right there on the screen. Does that answer your question? There you go. Let me just tell you also that if somebody's asking you a question and the answer is that you have no idea, that you've never heard that before ever, right? Which is probably a little ridiculous, but let's just say that they're asking you about something you don't do, don't have any experience with, or what have you, then it uses the same pattern, which is, you know what? I understand what red widgets are. I can certainly see why they're important to a business like yours. It's something that I'm aware of, I'm interested in. If you wouldn't, let me just tell you a little bit about how I would address working with red widgets, because I doubt that it's going to be red widgets is the only thing that you're working with that I'm not that familiar with. So let me tell you and give me an example of kind of how I solve problems in general. So one way of responding to something that you don't really know that much about is use that as an opportunity to describe how you approach problem solving. Because you would, if you were in this job and something comes up, because something will come up that you're not familiar with, your ability. So when you don't know an answer to something, use that as an opportunity to show somebody or demonstrate to somebody how you would solve problems that you don't know. Right, and so you can kind of go into that. Here's what I do know about red widgets. Here's where they fit in. I mean, Google is an awesome tool. In general, what I'd do is I'd go find some information and probably come up with a number of different alternatives. But prior to executing against one of those, I would check with other members of the team or check with you, and I'll be able to bring not only my homework but my suggestion is what we need to do. Once I've done that a couple of times, I think that we'll all be good, right? And so, again, the pattern is the thing that I'm trying to show you here, which is echo it back, give them a quick introductory answer, illustrate with an example, and hand the ball back. Does that answer your question? If you don't know the answer, or you're not familiar with it, or you're moving into unfamiliar territory, then it's easy to kind of say, hey, I really haven't. but there'll be other things that I'm going to run into. So how I would approach solving this and other kinds of problems that I'm going to run into that I haven't had experience with before, let me talk to you about that and use that as an opportunity to kind of shift the conversation into something else that's important, right? Hopefully that makes sense. So this pattern works for all of these things. So tell me about yourself. You already know how to answer this one, right? Why should we hire you? We're just going to look at a few. Why should we hire you? It's the same answer to this one. I think it's a horrible question, but I've been in interviews where people answer it or ask it, and I know hiring managers who have because candidates have told me, and I'll often ask candidates, individuals, well, how did you reply to that? And the most common answer is I told them, well, they're not going to find anybody that's going to work harder than me or blah, 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 whatever it is. And it's like, that's okay. But the truth is, they're not necessarily going to believe you, and you can't compare yourself to other people who are in consideration because you've got no idea. And so you just showed your hand with regard to making decisions without enough information. So if you're ever asked about why should we hire you, really don't compare yourself to somebody else. It's not a good idea. The reason, and especially people you don't know, um, but the real answer is, well, why you should hire me is, and I'd go straight back into this because, I'm an IT specialist in IT security. I've got these kinds of certifications because of this kind of a background, because I've got focus on helping people like you solve problems like this, because I've got these skills that I can use to ensure that I do that, so that's the answer to that. We'll just go through a few of these and happy to try to answer any if you've got some tricky ones you want to throw my way, but I think the answer is going to be kind of the same every single time, which is the good thing, which is you don't have to memorize how to answer different questions. All you got to do is figure out and practice this general pattern and everything will go really well for you, especially if you did your homework on the company, because when somebody pitches that question about red widgets, you can say, hey, I'm just curious, where do red widgets fit into things, right? If you know anything about them, you can say, hey, you got 4 different locations, you might have some insight because of the homework that you did. Let me just go over this real quick. What are your greatest strengths? That one's usually easy to answer, except for this, and it's commonly asked, except for this, is that what's missing in this question is what are your greatest strengths with regard to you being wildly successful in this role and making me a hero? That's the missing part. So what are your greatest strengths with regard to you being successful in this role and making me a hero? So that's what they're really asking. And then what are your greatest weaknesses? And going back to strengths, people always say, well, I'm a really, they talk about themselves as opposed to that particular situation. So put your answer in the context of that job and that person who you're talking to. It's not about you in general. Um, Greatest weaknesses, the most common thing that people do is they try to take something that's a strength and spin it as a weakness. Oh, I worked so hard, my significant other really complains about how I do, and man, I'm just a workaholic. Like, yeah, whatever, right? Really? So, trying to take something that's a strength and spinning it as a weakness, probably not a great idea, right? I mean, it's just not great. So here's the thing to do. What are your greatest weaknesses with regard to you being successful in this role? Pick something that's a true weakness. Pick something that is relevant to something that's going to be problematic for you in this particular role. But the important thing is to follow with what you're doing about it. So my personal one in almost any situation would be, I think I'm a pretty smart guy and I think that I can kind of keep things in my head, but the truth of the matter is that I do forget things like everybody else. Roles as recruiters are really wickedly busy and there are a lot of tasks that need to be performed. So I'm not naturally very organized. So the way that I solve those, I got this planner, I write everything down, I follow these lists, and that's going to be a forever thing for me. I wish that I was one of these people who was a little bit more naturally organized like that and love to make those kinds of lists, but if I don't, I'm not successful. So pick something that's real and tell me what it is that you're doing to resolve it. There's just so many, right? I mean, there's just so many. It's kind of pointless to go through them, but it is about, reaching into your heart, figuring out what really the truth is, and just having a conversation with people in the context of a great pattern for an answer is echo it back, some kind of introductory answer, illustrate it with an example or two, or what you would do if you were posed that situation, no matter what, because if you don't know it, you don't know it, and you're going to be posed that situation when you're on the job, right? And then hand the ball back through often a question. Does that answer your question? Could I tell you any more? Or a really great one, especially if you'd like to distract the situation just a little bit, is, hey, how do y'all use red widgets here? I mean, how long have you been using them? Tell me a little bit about you guys, how you use red widgets, right? And sometimes you can get them to begin to tell you the story, and it usually works pretty well if you do that. What do you think, Leslie? I mean, we got questions about this. This might be an area where some people have some questions or have some really difficult ones that they want to try to throw out there. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, we do have someone that I think needs a little bit more clarification. So the question here is, it says, since you suggest not asking questions, which I think you have specific questions you're talking about, this person says, how would you answer the interviewer when they say, what questions do you have for me?
Oh, no, 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 no. I'm sorry. I misspoke. I'm sorry if I was confusing. I was probably moving too fast. All I was really trying to say was that in an interview, you're clearly going to be asked questions. It was just a sidebar thing that says, as a recruiting coach, if you were an interviewer, I would suggest that you don't ask people any questions as an interviewer. I wasn't suggesting when it gets to the question part of what you're going to talk about that you don't ask questions. So just forget that I said that. It was kind of one of these sidebar things that, we don't have enough time to really talk about it. Actually, let me illustrate it this one way, which is just understand that in your life, when you ask somebody a question, you're actually placing an obligation on them to respond to your question. And the other thing, particularly in an interview setting, is that if you're the interviewer and you ask someone a question, they believe that there's a better and a worse answer, and they're going to tend to try to give you the answer they think is the better answer, right? So by asking people questions, you heavily influence the results that you're going to get. So if you're ever on the interviewing side of things, rather than asking somebody a question about red widgets, if they're telling you their career history, you can say, hey, when you were over XYZ company, did y'all use red widgets? It's still a question, literally, but it doesn't feel like one. And you don't necessarily believe that there's a better and a worse answer. So that's what I was trying to say.
Got it. Got it.
Okay,
That's perfect. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Um, I guess a good follow-up to that would be, do you have a particular question that you prefer interviewees to ask? Do you have anything that you
Yeah,
think?
as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, we're about to get to that.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
let's do that.
let's do that.
There. Let me look here real quick. It looks like there is one more question. This is probably part of what you're going to talk about. How would you approach an interview if you suspect there is a preferred internal candidate? In other words, the playing field may not be as level.
So what I think that you do is you always play your best and you don't worry about the other people who are on the field. I think that's what you do. I think
Okay.
that what's going on with other people is not only none of your business, it's kind of irrelevant, really.
Mm,
So put your best foot forward no matter what. I mean, what are you going to do if you know you're the only one, you're the front runner, you're going to hold back? So I get it. I get it from being curious, but as soon as you start getting curious about those things, you're causing yourself harm. You're causing yourself damage. And the reason why simple damages, the simple damage is that your attention is an asset that you have. And if you manage your attention, right, you need to have your attention focused on your ability to solve the problem and your ability to be the person who's going to help the hiring manager be some more successful. And as soon as you take any of that attention and pay any attention to the fact that other candidates even exist, I don't know how that helps you.
okay.
So that's
So
my
focus on
answer,
yourself.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, a major stumbling block with me as an interviewer is when people want to try to make a decision about something or, worry about, they either want to make a decision about something that without sufficient information. I had a candidate just the other day telling me, well, I guess they must not like me. And I kind of go, you have no idea. I mean, you're making that up. And so anytime somebody's in this position where through lack of information, they're making up negative responses about what's going on, they become needy. And that's how you feel when that happens, is you feel needy. And all I have to tell you is that needy isn't pretty. No one likes it. And so, yeah, don't worry about the other people. Do your best.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect. That sounds good. We can carry
cool.
on and we'll ask the other ones after.
All right, great. And by the way, hopefully none of these things ever feel like personal attacks on anyone. I'm here to not pull any punches, right? I'm here to tell you how it really works. I'm here to be the guy that's behind the scenes that says, there's a lot of advice out there about what to do. Consider, I mean, I make my living because people get hired, and I'm here. And at one point in my career, particularly in the downturn in 2008, decided that one of the things that I could do to try to help, and I appreciate you being here and giving me this opportunity, is to take some of the things that I've learned and try to shape those into things that, maybe other people can benefit from. So, um, yeah, so that's my intent, is to, try to tell it as much like it is as I possibly can. So prepare insightful questions. So define the questions that you're going to ask, right? This is really important because in almost every interview, there's going to come a time when it's your turn to talk and or ask questions. So right off the bat, the characteristic of a great question is right here on the screen, is that the characteristics of a great question is that it shows your interest in the problem. It shows your interest in the company. It shows your interest in the person who's interviewing you, right? It shows you as curious. A great question demonstrates your ability to solve the problems in your industry and your company because you can ask problems about, anyway, it'll demonstrate your ability. A great question is going to show that you're interested in success for the company or for the team or for the boss. In example question, the style of question that works really well is, what have I got to do to be successful, right? What does success look like? What can I do to ramp up quickly? If this is a potential boss, you can say, in addition to the things that I need to do to be great at my job, what are the things that I could do to really support the team or to support you in my success? I'm not trying to put the ball before the cart. I'm going to focus on what it is that I do, but I know that my work impacts other people. So I'm curious, what else could I do to be successful in this role? So that line of questioning is the line of questioning, right? The other thing that you should think about with respect to formulating questions is you got to consider, will asking this question make the other person, sorry, I think he's falling out of my ear. Those of you who aren't paying attention, my thing is my little earbud in my ear. But the thing you ask yourself is by asking this question, is that likely to make the other person more interested and more confident in me? And if you don't have a definitive, yeah, it's going to make them more likely to, you can't know for sure, but is there some likelihood that asking this will make them more interested in me, like me more, engage with me more? Then that's a great question. If you look at the question and say, no, I'm not sure, then don't ask it. So as an example, the individual I was talking to the other day, and I get it, he's just curious, but asking all the questions you want to know about, well, which cloud platform are they on and all those kinds of things is like, really, would my answer make any difference as to whether or not you move forward or not? No, then why are you asking that question? And it doesn't make me more interested in you that you're asking that kind of question. The worst style of questions, I believe, in interviews, particularly early stage, is the what's in it for me questions. Well, what's the benefits and what's the time off and what are all these things? What do I get, right? What's in it for me? Hmm, hmm, hmm. I'm not here to suggest that as a professional and as a human in our economy, that all of those things and what you get aren't important. They're really important. But in the arc of a series of interviews, there is nothing about asking those questions that makes people more interested in you. So what you do with the questions that you're curious about and the questions that are important to you, save those until later in the process once you already are clear that they like you and are interested in you. Once it gets to the point where they're clearly interested in you, you've now earned the right to start asking those kinds of questions, because you need the answers to those kinds of questions to evaluate whether or not you would accept an offer. But early stage in the interview process, you're not there to decide whether or not you're going to accept an offer. You don't even know anything yet. And so you're there in the early stages to get to the next step, to get to the next step, to get to the next step, and ultimately to earn the right to ask the questions that matter to you, right? So put those kinds of questions in your back pocket, and all of the questions have to be around, hey, what can I do to be successful, right? What are some of the, all of those kinds of things and you can often take the homework that you did and you can talk about the fact that, hey, these are the products and services. I actually researched some of your competition in this area. It looks like XYZ company has come out with a new competitive product. I mean, what are we going to do to make sure that we're able to be competitive against XYZ? Not from a position of doubt, but from a position of kind of going, I'm interested in this business. I'm interested in what you guys do. I'm interested in making a difference, right? So that line of questioning is really where you want to stick. I mean, just stay there and you'll be all good. If you have so many interviews going on that you really don't have time other than to be selective and highly selective, and you got 8 different jobs to choose from, yeah, you can be, you can ask those kinds of questions early on. I send messages to people all the time as a recruiter, and I'll say, hey, I'm working on this kind of opportunities, when the time is right and for your, when the time is right, perhaps you'd be interested in considering, when the time is right for you to consider a job change, please let me know, right? And people will send back a message that says, what's it pay? It's like, it doesn't pay you anything because I'm really not responding to that question. I mean, really? Are you kidding me? That's the first thing you want to talk to me about? Okay, so there's that. What do you think? Does that make sense, Leslie? Does that answer kind of that question? I think that I mean, this is it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
All right.
Very clear.
Okay, cool. So your first question should be about how you can create success and contribute. Your next questions might be, by the way, if there's still time, your next set of questions, the first set is going to be, how do you create success and how are you going to contribute? That's item number 3 here. Number 4 is your next questions might be about the interviewer. Get them to talk about themselves. Get them, so, hey, I'm just curious, Sally, you've been here like 8 years. What are some of the projects? What are some of the biggest successes that you've had? I know that you've been in this particular role for about the last year and a half, right? I mean, what are some of the challenges you have, and what are some of the things that would be important for me to know, so that it kind of tie that back to, tell me about you and some of those kinds of things, and what could I do to help you, besides these kinds of things. So first, what do you need to do to be successful? Second, with regard to the interviewer, find out some things about them, get them to talk about themselves, not about themselves. Get them to talk about their successes in the company, things that they've learned, things that they prefer, how they've grown. Those kinds of things will go a long way. All the what's in it questions should be deferred to later. Now, this isn't a question, but it's something that comes up a lot, which is, hey, I've got this thing, I've got this medical condition, I have this special need, I'll need some kind of an accommodation, or there's this thing about me that I think is important for people to know, and I want to be, it often is asked to me in the context of, I want to be honest, I want to be open, right? So all of those kinds of things fall in that same category of, is what you're about to say likely to make someone more interested in you or less interested in you? And if the answer isn't clearly more interested in you, then it's a not interested in you, right? So don't talk about those things. So as an example, let's just say that I needed some kind of a special accommodation, that I needed to work from home 1 day a week, right? For whatever reason. Let's just say that that's matters, right? It's important to me. And in fact, it won't work out if we don't. Well, if in the very first interview, and let's just say that it's for a support center where everybody works in this support center, right? There's 5 people who do IT support inside of this organization. We all work there. We all work in these cubes. We're there all the time. We're not looking for anybody who's working remote or anything like that. If in the very first interview you say, hey, well, I'm going to have to work from home 1 day a week, is that a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. And yeah, no, we need you here every single day. So it's possible that you needing that accommodation or whatever it is, bam, we're done, because there isn't anything about that that's going to make them like you more. And if there are other people who don't have that, then then it's a whole lot easier. But if what you do is, I'm not suggesting you don't ever bring it up, but those things that are, what's in it for me, what do I get paid, can I have these accommodations, what's the vacation, what's the benefits, all that kind of stuff, what do I get, and can the circumstance work, I've got a special circumstance, you move those to the point where those conversations happen after you have a feeling that they're really already interested. And in fact, if you can time it where it's right before getting an offer, then what could have been in the first conversation saying, hey, I need this special accommodation, I have to work from home 1 day a week, is that all right? It'll move into, no, that isn't all right. To, if they've fallen in love with you and they really want you to bring you on board your team, and you say, hey, I've got this special accommodation, and it might have just turned into a, yeah, that's fine, that's fine, because I've already talked to you a bunch of times. I mean, why, so anything that you've got that you believe is important for somebody to know that falls in that category of, it's probably not going to make them more interested in me, then I suggest that you put that on the table later in the conversation, not up front in the conversation. It'll get there. It's about the truth. It's about nothing but the truth. But it's not always about all the whole truth all at the same time. right? I mean, think of it as dating, right? And getting to know and build a relationship. I mean, on your first date, you don't talk about all the things that aren't cool about you, right? All right, just tying up a couple of loose ends. Dress appropriately. I shouldn't have to say that, but it's amazing how many people don't know how to get there. I believe that if you're not in the parking lot 20 minutes early, then you're late. Traffic can happen. Being late is so important that if I have a candidate who I find out that they're late, I almost write it off. I mean, we're almost done now. Um, I'm kind of going, oh man, I'm not going to get paid. Um, yeah, it's kind of that big of a deal. So be to the parking lot 20 minutes or you're late, but don't go in 20 minutes early, because as soon as you go in 20 minutes early, then you're going to interrupt the person. They're going to go, I'm gonna smell this other thing. I mean, what are they doing here already, right? Don't let them have that feeling. By the way, in an interview and reviewing your resume and everything else, I mean, it's not one big decision. It's this whole series of micro decisions, and those micro decisions come with sound effects. And some of the sound effects are, what are you doing here, right? Don't make people make that sound, right? And so, the great things about you make people go, oh, huh, yeah, right, yeah. The things that aren't great is like, eh. Being there too early, right? Don't do that. Being there late is way worse than that. It's a sound effect that I'm not going to make. It's something like a splat, right? Is what it is. So get to the office about 5 minutes before your interview. Consider just sitting there waiting in the parking lot. Review your notes. Have a phone number. Have a cell phone number of either the person who you're interviewing with, or whoever the recruiter is, or whoever you can contact, or whatever it is. Because if you're running late, don't be the person who's late. Be the person who calls 10 minutes before you're late. And don't call 2 minutes after and say you're late. If you're going to be late, call 10 minutes before, not even 20 minutes before. Call 10 minutes before. Hey, I'm running late. I'm going to be there by this time. If your GPS says 17 minutes after the hour, say I'll be there by 25 after. Give yourself some time. Don't be late twice. Yeah, just don't be late. The other thing to think about is that some companies are in these big campuses, and you might not even have the building number. You get there and there's 5 big buildings and they're all in the same address, and you're lost, and that's not an excuse. All right. Hey, Leslie. So I don't know if it's happening on everybody's end, but I think my camera keeps changing colors. I feel like the horse of a different color.
No,
Um,
you're good. You look the same.
Okay, good. Not that I'm too worried about that. We just got to the end of that section. I wanted to say hi and see if there's anything else we needed to talk about, because what we figured out was the secret to acing your interview is all in the preparation. It really is. And we got time to go through the rest of this stuff, but I mean, that's really what that's really what it is that you need to know about. Anything else that we need to talk about that?
Well, actually, there was a question about attire, and
Yeah,
so basically, when you say dress appropriately,
yeah.
are suits required for first interviews these days?
No, I think that the simple answer is dress one step better than you'll dress when you're actually in the job. And the way that you can find out is you can ask someone, whoever's setting up the interview, ask them. Right? I
Okay.
mean, ask.
Hmm.
And if you can't find out any other way, then drive there a day or two before and see what people are wearing, right?
Hmm.
Because it makes people a little uncomfortable if you're like overdressed. It's uncomfortable. But one step, so if you're going to be in a role where you're going to wear jeans and a t-shirt, then wear khakis and a button down, right? If you've never been there before or whatever it is, then you can wear khakis and a button down and maybe consider bringing a blazer with you or something like that. But the general rule is dress one step nicer than you'll actually dress when you're on the job, and then you're all good. The other thing that I do suggest is that, unfortunately, early stage, sometimes people will evaluate you based upon whether you have full sleeve tattoos, all kind of stuff. So you might want to think about covering that up. Okay, will people evaluate you for that? No, not most people, but some people will. So those kinds of things. It's about being professional. It's about be one step nicer than you'll be on the job.
Okay, kind of like consider your audience and step it up a little.
Yeah, step it up just a little, not a whole lot, right? I mean, if you're an IT person, you're going to be crawling around in closets and doing wiring and stuff like that. You don't need to wear a suit.
Got it. Okay, great.
Cool.
If you have more stuff to cover, we can ask questions at the end.
Okay, just a couple of other things. And the truth of the matter is that, performing during your interview, if you've actually been well prepared, all of this stuff will go. So just a couple of things to think about. You can read these notes later. It isn't anything that's that significant, which is don't ever forget about first impressions. Small talk is part of the interview process up front, right? So be aware that what you're talking about. So, oh yeah, traffic was horrible, right? Why? I mean, be aware that even during the small talk, that everything you're saying, I mean, make sure that's things that says, will talking about this make somebody more interested in me? So just be aware of that. Um, just to reiterate on point 3 here is focus on solving the problem, right? So when you're in the interview, try to take the spotlight off of you and recognize that the spotlight really isn't on you. And anytime you can, shift the focus over to talk about the problem, your interest in solving the problem, your motivation to solve the problem, your ability to solve the problem, right? That's what it's really all about. So you focus on solving the problem and things will go really well. 3.4 is, we've already talked about all of these things, I think, in the context of preparation, which is, but anytime somebody asks you a question, where you can, respond with actual results, respond with the story, respond with an example, and the more you can quantify that example in terms of its size, its scope, its color, its shape, its whatever it is, so that somebody can kind of experience it, the better off that you are, right? So if you can respond with results or some kind of a context, even if you don't know a number of a percentage improvement or anything like that. Well, there's a team of 5 of us and we were doing this kind of stuff and we solved this problem this way. So give them a little bit of context and things will go a whole lot better. We talked about this. You're going to ask your insightful questions. You know, you're going to have prepared ones that are about, what do I need to do to be successful? What are the things, you know, that have been most successful for you? What do you enjoy most? What are your some, and ask questions about that other person and put the what's in it for me questions in your back pocket. We could talk forever about compensation. I've only got one thing to say about compensation, which is, um, I, I don't, it doesn't make sense to me that anybody gives me a range. If you tell me 60 to 70,000, the only thing I heard was 60. I've heard a lack of confidence. And so I'm kind of going, upper 50s, right? So, you know, tell me 63. That's a little bit more interesting. If you don't want to put a number on the table, then you can certainly always try the approach that's like, hey, you know, what really matters to me is the growth and the opportunity of the team that I'm working with. And as long as we're somewhere in market value, we'll be fine. I don't anticipate any problems with that. So, you know, there's all kinds of things I can do, but don't lowball. Don't expect that it's going to go up. Don't nickel and dime later. And it's pointless to give a range because nobody will hear anything but the bottom of the range and your lack of confidence in what it is. So narrow it, right? So not much else to say about compensation. Negotiating comp is a whole different conversation than we're here to talk about. Final thing I have to say that's really important is how to close your interview and follow up. So here's how you close your interview, which is, it's really simple, which is, of course, you know, thanks and all that, great to meet you and everything. An important thing you can add to that is, you know, your interest in the job isn't really all that interesting because I might have 5 other people who are interested in the job. So you being interested doesn't make you stand out in any other way. I mean, you telling me your interest is like, okay, good. I'm okay, awesome, great. Doesn't make me like you less or more, just okay, awesome. What's going to be more interesting to me is why you're motivated, what you learned in the interview. Thanks so much for your time. One of the things I learned today was this, right? One of the things that I learned today is that the kinds of problems that you have in this regard are really motivating to me, right? This is an environment in which I think that I'll thrive. So position yourself in terms of that, you know, you're interested in the opportunity and stuff like that, you know, whatever, that doesn't matter. It's not going to do you any good, but your interest does. But here's the deal. Item number 1, never leave without knowing the person's contact information. Get the contact information right up front. Hey, do you have a business card? Okay, great. Hey, I'm just curious, what was your name again? How do I spell that? What's your email address? Right, get their contact information right up front. And then what you need to do is close with next steps. So I'm just curious, Bob, you know, what should I expect in terms of next steps? And they'll say, oh, well, somebody getting back to you or whatever it is, beg. And it's like, well, I'll tell you what, Bob, you know, if I hadn't, it's Friday right now, if I hadn't heard anything by the end of the day on Thursday, would it be all right if I follow up with you? And the answer is almost always going to be yes. And so now don't expect that it's their responsibility to follow up with you. Maybe you take on some of that responsibility yourself because it gives you an opportunity to get yourself top of mind. By the way, sending a thank you message afterward is the only purpose. There's a couple of purposes for it, but the main purpose for it is to put yourself back top of mind so that somebody remembers you again. So my suggestion is don't send the thank you message today, send it tomorrow, because today you're already top of mind with me. Tomorrow you brings you back to top of mind. And when you send me that thank you, if you also add, hey, I really enjoyed learning this, I think that this was really important. Since we were talking, I've been continuing to think about that one thing we were talking about the red widgets. Let me tell you about that. Or I did some homework and here's something so give them something that's of value, right? And do it the next day, not that same day, because it gives you a chance to bring yourself back to top of mind. But the important thing in closing is have their contact information, get their permission to follow up with them and set a date. Hey, Bob, if I hadn't heard anything by next Thursday, would it be all right if I follow up with you? And almost always it's going to be, yeah, okay, great. And so now next Thursday, when you do follow up, then instead of being the guy who's, or the person who's needy and, you can say, Bob, you'll recall we interviewed last Friday. I promised to follow up with you on Thursday, and that's what I'm doing. So instead of being the person who's like reaching out, hey, what do you think? Where are you at? What's the feedback, right? Instead, you're kind of going, hey, I promised you that I would follow up. So here I am I'm showing you again. I'm the person who does what I said that I was going to do. Tell you what, if I haven't heard anything by the middle of next week, I'll reach out to you again. I really do appreciate your time. I learned this kind of stuff, Ray. If there's anything else that I could do to answer any additional questions or anything, don't hesitate to ask, right? That's what I'm going to do. So close with next steps. What are we going to do next? And get their commitment that it's okay. So your progress after the interview, we already talked about, which is follow up with a quote unquote thank you, but do it the next day. If you interviewed on Friday, do it on Monday afternoon. Don't have it in their email on Monday morning. It's too busy for a Monday afternoon, right? When they're going to pay attention to it. And in that, talk about your motivation, talk about what you learned, give them something that's of value. And then what you need is a general follow-up campaign, because you might not get a certain answer. You probably talk to multiple people along the way. So just understand what you're going to do in terms of that follow-up campaign. Don't, be politely aggressive about it, and always set the expectation. Hey, if I haven't heard anything, I'll follow up with you. And then when you're following up with them, you're not the person who's just out of the blue. You're just the person who's following up with what you committed to do. It feels a whole lot better to people, and will work a whole lot better. All right, that's it. What do you think, Leslie? We're under the wire by a whole 4 minutes.
Hey, well, that's good because we do have a few questions.
Sure.
Let's start with the salary piece real quick.
Yeah. Right.
When a recruiter or hiring manager asks you about salary,
Mm-hmm.
how do you go about answering that? And especially if you are currently underpaid.
Sure. And so, one quick thing is that I think that the compensation you get paid going forward should have nothing to do with what you're currently paid. It's about the value of the work that's going forward. So, not that I can change the world, but it's inappropriate to have the conversation with you about what you currently make. But let me talk about how to answer that question over the life cycle of a series of interviews. In the very first interviews, you can often kind of get away with, if you will, this notion that says, well, I tell you what, I mean, as long as we're in the zone of, general market value for these kinds of roles, I don't think that we'll have any problem with compensation. And the reason why it's difficult to say is that depending upon how great the team is, what the real opportunity is, how much difference I can make in terms of the success of the company. I mean, if things are, if all of that stuff lines up great, heck, I might just do this job for free, right? Okay, there's a little chuckle there or what have you. But you can set it aside sometimes at the beginning by making other things more important. Other times, you've eventually got to get to where, I mean, my conversation with you would be, hey, Leslie, you know what? I mean, I understand that the role of the team, all that kind of stuff is going to make a big difference, but in general, at the end of the day, we all get paid. Maybe you can give me a little bit of guidance with regard to what type of compensation makes sense for you. So kind of understand what does make sense for you. Don't put out a number that would make you uncomfortable, because if you say $40,000 a year or you say $20,000 a year, whatever it is, if you can't be comfortable on that, don't say it. Yeah, it's difficult. The more clear you can be about what it really means and what range you're interested in, and just pick a number that makes really sense when you get to that point. But early stage sometimes is about, hey, what's really important to me is the opportunity. As long as we're in or around market value, I can't imagine that there's a problem. And then eventually, sometimes, you'll have to have a real discussion about compensation. The truth of the matter is, particularly for entry-level roles or career transition, usually companies have a budget that's pretty fixed anyway. It's not like it's going to be very flexible. And the truth is that, you won't be taken out of the process just because of the fact that your compensation is a little over budget. I mean, maybe, but there's no way to play that game anyway. So that's it's a challenging thing, but try to avoid it up front and just talk about market value, and eventually get to the point where you're clear about a number.
Yeah, kind of like you said, make them want you first, and then that conversation comes up.
Yeah. One final comment on that is that if you want to bring it up in the context of an interview, then instead of talking about what you get paid on day number one, a great question is, hey, in this role, if somebody was here a couple of years and somebody's really successful in this role, I mean, how much money might somebody be making in a couple of years? So now you're painting the picture of the future, you're painting a picture of growth, and you're not trying to narrow it down to what I'm going to get paid. It's sometimes about, hey, a couple of years from now when we're wildly successful and stuff like that, tell me a little bit about, the growth opportunity and the career opportunity and the compensation opportunity a few years out. And then that way, if, $50,000 makes sense to you and they're saying 2 years out, you can make $35,000 a year, you just learned something. So sometimes put it out in the future is an easy way to take the pressure off that conversation.
Yep,
Yep.
that sounds good.
Cool.
Another question we have is really about having a challenging interview. For example, how do you address an interviewer if he or she does not show interest in your answers, or maybe they're just in a hurry or they don't know the content?
Mm.
How do you make yourself stand out there?
You know, it's hard to say out of a specific context, but I think that all of us to one degree or another are going to have the ability to engage another person in a conversation. So some are going to be better at it, some are going to be not as good at it, some are be more challenged by it. But I really think that the answer is to engage the other person in the conversation. Sometimes that can be through asking questions about them, about their successes, about, what can you do? That kind of line of questioning might get them to talking, right? It might get them to talking. And psychologically, um, when you get people to talk about themselves or the work that they do, they like you better. So that's probably the only thing in general that I could say that is at least is a good attempt to do that. And then, I mean, if you catch somebody on the day that their dog died, or something like that happened to them in their life, then, you know, sometimes circumstances make it more difficult.
Challenging, yes. Well, and this may be the last question. I know we have a few questions, but there's a kind of one I can combine here. And essentially, let's say you have a couple challenges. For example, you've been self-employed for 30 years, and they ask
Mm,
you, why are you looking for a job now? And then
mhm,
potentially, let's say that it's, you're applying for a management job, but you haven't managed people before, or it's been a
mhm,
while. How do
mhm.
you answer? How do you navigate that?
Right. So I think that the 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 underlying response to all of those kinds of things, we'll just narrow it down to the one of you've been a contractor for the last 30 years. Why is it that you'd be interested in being employed now? So I think that the more you can put the answer in why it's a benefit to them as opposed to why it's a benefit to you, the better off that you'll be. So with regard to the one about the contractor, I think that the answer might be, the truth might be, uh, and you always want to speak the truth. The truth might be, what? I've learned so much. I've been really fortunate to have been inside of all these kinds of different companies. I travel a lot. I'd like to sleep in my own bed. And really what my root motivation is that I finally realized that all of the experience that I have, the expertise that I've gained in being inside of 500 different companies, in my case, 350 different companies, I've learned so much more than I would have any other way. And it's just time in my career that I take everything that I know to bring it inside of a company where I can truly leverage the expertise and the experience I've had. So I think that the best answers are those ones that it's always going to be a kernel of the truth. And a kernel of the truth is because I want to do what I do to help you guys be more successful. That's my root motivation, right? So that's always a good root motivation. But with respect to the contractor employee thing, that's a classic one, which is really just kind of tell the truth. And one of the truths is you learned a whole lot. And one of the truths is, I'm never part of the equation. And what I'd really like to do is take everything that I've got, really bring it to bear in one place and actually be part of the program, right? As opposed to somebody who's just in and out for a part bit role.
Right, right.
What was the other one? I forgot what you
Oh, the
asked.
other one was if it's been a while since you've managed people, but you're
Hmm.
applying for a management position.
Yeah.
And how do you convey that, yes, I'm a good fit for this?
Yeah, on that particular one, and we'll just try to generalize this one too, which is anytime there's been a while since you've done something, somebody's going to have some concern about that. And there's this gambit that's called feel, felt, found, which is I understand how you feel. In fact, I've felt the same way before, but what I found is this, which is kind of the general thing. So anytime it's been a while since you have proven ability to do something, and somebody says, hey, we haven't managed people for a while, tell me a little bit about that. I was like, I've been thinking about that myself, right? And what it is that I loved about it and what it was that's challenging about it. And what I found is that, with regard to something that's really satisfying in my work is this kind of stuff. And with regard to being really effective at it, that the key principles that I learned about this is this one, and this one. So given the opportunity to, lead a team again is not only inspiring to me, but kind of putting those tools back on and really moving. So the idea of the underlying answer here is to say, I understand how you feel. In fact, I have exactly the same concerns. I've been thinking about that. And what I found as a result of thinking about that is see these skills, see these techniques, see my motivation. That's the reason why this is going to work out. So, I mean, I think maybe that's the general answer, right? What people often will do on that is, well, it doesn't matter what people often do, but a pattern like that will probably work better.
Perfect. That's
Yep.
excellent, Gary. Thank you
Hey,
so
right on.
much.
Okay, you're welcome.
I think that's everything. Thank you.
All right.
Basically, quick reminder, we at New Horizons are working with you to achieve your employment objectives. If we did not answer one of your questions, make sure to reach out to your career consultant at newhorizons.com. Again, do a quick zip code search and find the nearest location. Again, our webinar schedule is being updated for the new 2020 year. Can you believe it? How crazy is that? So hang tight with us. We're going to get that thing up pretty quickly, and you can always, as always, find all of our archives at our newhorizons.com. One more thing, we are going to be sending you the archived recording link either later today or potentially early Monday. It could happen over this weekend, but keep an eyeball out for that. And we thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you at our next session.
Leslie, thank you. Thanks for letting me be here, everyone.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.